All right, let's fire it up. So today we're going to talk about the B-101. The B-101 is a document that you guys will be using lots and lots for the course of your careers if you stay in architecture. If you become a lawyer like me, you see it every day. This document, I think I said earlier in one of my earlier lectures, AIAs, these documents, these form documents are probably used in 70% of all the construction projects in the industry, and this is the main document between the owner and architects. If you remember, I'm not sure if we've talked about this, so there are a series of suites of documents that the American Institute of Architects puts out. There's the A series. The A series are owner-contractor side and contractor-subcontractor. The B series is the owner-architect side. And then the C series deals with consultants and other things, and then there's an E and an F. I don't know what happened to the D series, but principally we're going to be dealing with today, we're in the B series, the owner-architect. Now within that B series, there's the 101, there's a 102, a 103, a 104, and various divisions of that. The numbers relate to the size of the project. So the 101 kind of covers everything. It covers projects anywhere from, if you're going to do a home addition, up to a project that is in the hundreds of millions. In fact, I just negotiated a B-101 for a project that's going to be about a $350 million project. So it has a huge expanse, and it can do a lot of things. It's the most flexible of all the documents. There is one called the 103, and the 103 is designed for large-scale projects. So I debated on this big project whether I was going to use the 101 or the 103. I opted for the 101 because there is some specific pricing and who's responsible for cost estimating and some other elements of how the project is priced out. Not how much the architect charges, but how the project is actually costed out that is more applicable to the 103. I also have two projects right now that are using the 104. Those are smaller contained projects that don't have a large scope. So the one project I'm using for the 104 is for a high-rise in Chicago that they're doing tuck pointing and resurfacing the skin of the building. So the building's been in existence. They got to do tuck pointing, seal coating, fixing the windows. So it's a very limited and narrow scope. It's only going to be one contractor. It's not multiple trades. And there's no plumbing. There's no electrical. It's just so that's something that the 104 would use. But the B-104 is for your average architect that does everything under the sun. And so what we're going to do today is I'm literally going to walk through each provision. There are a few provisions in the actual document that aren't on the slides because they're irrelevant, very minor stuff that isn't that doesn't impose a legal obligation or isn't important to how the architect interrelates with the owner or the contractor. But I'm going to walk through these, and I'm going to explain to you, and if anybody flipped through any of the slides, some of the provisions have highlights or the bold and italics. Those are when you're going back and looking for the exam, those are the areas, and I'll try to emphasize them when I'm talking about them, that might be on the exam. So you'll see something, and it is because it's the important language in the very specific provision. I'm going to go fast today because it's a long document. We will not get through this entire set of slides. The goal is, I can't remember if I get through Article 5 or Article 6. I think I get through Article 5, and then we'll finish everything up next week. And then it'll be the same kind of exercise. Where's my phone so I can keep time? It's the same exercise we'll do when we do the 102. So without further ado, let's start in. Okay, so Article 1, and there are a few changes, and I'm going to tell this for some people because in addition to you guys teaching, a lot of people listen to these lectures when they study for the exams, and I highly recommend, because these suites of documents, came out in 2017, they're going to be around until 2027. The AIA revises its documents every 10 years. So presuming that any of you take your AREs before 2027, and actually the AIA uses them for another 18 months, so into 2028, your exams will be based on this document. So enjoy it for today and for your midterm. And then 5 years from now, or whenever you guys decide to sit for your AREs, Come back, find these lectures. A lot of people listen to my lectures online because this is exactly what they test on. So there may be a few times where I'm going to talk about what was in the 2007, because there's some people that haven't taken the exam that have been practicing for a while, that used to work under the 2007s. Now they work on the 2017, so I may point out this is a difference in the document. For purposes of the exam, you don't need to worry. I'm not going to ask any questions. What was in the 07s versus the 17s? I'm just kind of doing this a little bit for my other audience that listens to. So, first, the reason why I said, first out of the box, Article 1, initial information. So they used to have, the B-101 used to have a separate document that was Exhibit A. And in Exhibit A was some of the information in Article 1, and that included where the project site was, the description of the project, who the parties were, a little bit more about the owner, a little bit more about the contractor. The AIA said, well, that just doesn't make sense. Why do we have it in a separate document? Let's just put it all in here. So the initial information has all been rolled into one. So it's pretty simple. The owner's program for the project, that's a description of the project. What we're going to do is we're going to be building a 15-story condo building, and that's going to be a description of that. Project's physical characteristics you're going to describe. So these are in Article 1, Section 1.1, 1.1.2, and 1.1.3. It's just your basics about what the project is. What is it? What's its physical characteristic? And what's its budget? Real simple stuff. So this and things like this, don't worry about this is going to be exam. A lot of the stuff, if there are going to be questions about that might be exam, I'm going to try to highlight for you guys today in the class, but I still want to walk through so everybody understands how this document functions. Purpose of these types of things is just so the parties kind of know the lay of the land. I'm designing this type of building. I know what my budget is. 1.1.4, the anticipated design and construction milestone dates. So the owner wants to know, and so does the architect and ultimately the contractor, want to know how long it's going to take and what are these key milestone dates. So it's going to define, you have a design phase, you have a construction commencement, substantial completion, and any other milestone dates. So the contract says to you, owner and architect, I want you to start thinking about this right out of the box. And that's very helpful for planning. If you think about it, most people that build buildings, other than your own residential house, and even if you have a house, you want to know when you're going to move in, but most buildings are being built for a commercial purpose. And so the owner wants to know, when's my factory coming online? When am I going to be able to start leasing out units, for my strip mall? When can I start selling my condo units? So that owner is carrying a construction loan, so they can pay the architect and pay the contractor. They want to know when they can start making money off the building. So these dates, how long are you going to take to design, and when are you going to give me these important points of design? When does the contractor actually start? Because I've got one type of construction loan for my architect, and I got to amp it up, and I got to get a whole lot more funds from my contractor. So these are important dates, and it's in this agreement, like most things in the agreements, the parties may know, but if you have it written down, it forces everybody to start really thinking about it and helps the architect plan, helps the owner plan. The owner intends, 1.1.5, the owner intends to follow the following procurement and delivery method. Procurement and delivery method means, how am I going to pay for it? And what is the type of, as a delivery method, is it going to be fast track versus your traditional linear design bid build? So if you think about a traditional project is, owner hires an architect, they design the project, and the drawings are completed to about 90 to 100% complete. Then they send it out to bid. Then they get the bid, they figure out who's going to be the contractor, they award the contract, then they build. Very linear, design, bid, build. Fast track, you start doing design, and you start, the architect continues to work on design, but they finish, say, the foundations and the structural steel and the early stuff. And the owner says, okay, that's finished, and give me kind of your idea for the rest of the building. I'm going to go out to bid earlier. And we're going to have, a little bit later, there'll be a lecture in the second half of the semester showing how these delivery methods are. But there's an overlap. So the project, the span, design bid build is long. If you have a fast track, design build or design can CM at risk, it's a shorter period of time. That gets the owner's project up and running. It also costs less. Time is money. If you have a project that lasts 3 years and you can make it 16 months or 18 months, it's going to be cheaper for the owner. So that's what this concept of here is procurement and delivery method is, how am I going to be delivering it to the end? Fast track, design bid build, what are you going to do? 1.1.6. The owner's anticipated sustainable objective for the project. This is new in this one. but it actually has been a genesis and been building up over the course of time. Sustainable objective is the AIA recognizing that green is good. And so what they decided, in previous examples of previous versions of the document, they talked about that the architect shall investigate and use sustainable methods in design and things like this. Now what they're saying is the owner, not just the architect, has the obligation to think about green design, of which many times the owner doesn't want to pay the extra cost for. Here, this contract now says under 1.1.6, I want the owner to think about it. Now, I will tell you this. I would say less than 10% of my owners keep this provision in here because they know one of two things. A, it's going to be more expensive because green building is more expensive. In the long run, green building probably is cheaper for a building if you do it properly. The operational cost for a green building should be cheaper, but the owners don't want to spend the money on the upfront construction costs. Number two, most owners don't really understand what this means, and so they're going to have to pay someone to help them figure out what is my sustainable objective. But what I try to tell my clients is, guys, it's really simple. Just say you want to be lead. And lead, do you guys all know what lead is? Okay. So lead has all these parameters. Now, you have to pay a cost for filing lead and getting the certification, but that's as easy as it could be for sustainable objectives. So it's something I'm trying to educate my clients to, but it's good because the AIA is saying, owner, I want you to think about it, not just the architect. We're going to have you think about the sustainable objective. So then there's some subsets to 1.1.6. It says if the owner identifies a sustainable objective, the owner and the architect shall complete and incorporate document E204, Sustainable Objective Project Exhibit, into the contract, essentially what this says in 1.1.1161. And the owner and architect shall incorporate the completed E204 into the agreements with the consultants and the contractors. So here's what they say, because the AIA is trying to make it easy for them. They're going to say, we created this document called the E204. It's a brand new form. That's what it says 2017 on it. And in that form, it's got all these things for the architect and the owner to fill out. Whether it's lead. If it's lead, do they want to have lead silver, lead gold, lead bronze? What do they want to do? If there are other elements about this. And so they create together, they work together, and they create a plan. And that becomes part of the contract. And that puts obligations, as we've talked about earlier, contract puts obligations on parties. Both parties now have an obligation to satisfy with whatever's in the plan. And it's kind of nice. It's kind of like a shopping list. It's not regimented. You don't have to pick everything. But you should, if you do opt for this, you pick some stuff and you have a sustainable objective and you have a sustainable project plan. It's now an exhibit to the contract and everybody knows the rules to the game. And then the second part that's important in this paragraph 1161 is it says once owner and architect, because they're the first two people talking in the project, once they figure out the plan, everybody downstream, if the architect hires an electrical engineer or mechanical engineer, that architect's going to take that E204 exhibit and give it to them. Here's the owner of my plan. You need to follow it. Owner's going to do the same thing. They're going to take that, owner's going to take that E204 and they're going to give it to the contractor. And then, interestingly enough, there is a separate form that the owner and the contractor fill out because there's some additional obligations that the contractor has that are not related to the design, but for their purchasing, maybe where they buy the stuff from, how they buy the stuff. So the owner a good green owner may then start looking to the contractor to have specific vendors to use because they have a higher green rating. So there's some elements of that. But the point is there's this new chunk that's in this document, the Sustainable Project Objective, that's going to create this cascade of items that are going to happen. First owner and architect, then architect and its consultants, then owner and contractor, if owner hires anybody else. And it keeps the flow of this sustainable building from beginning to end. So that's what we're going to talk about. That's all what 116 is for. Any questions on that? Good. 117, owner identifies the following representative. Who's my main point person? So each party is going to have the main point person. That's the owner's rep. 118. The persons or entities in addition to the owner's representatives who are required to review the architect's submittals. So I have a project right now where it's a massive project, and the design, the owner retained a specialty engineer for this project to develop what we call, it's called the basis of design. It is not the plans and specs. It is a performance specification. You're going to build this type of building with these types of rooms and these types of systems. And these rooms and these systems must operate in these certain ways. There's no floor plans. There's no electricals. There's nothing. It's just this 500-page document called a basis of design that is a roadmap. We give that to the design professional that the owner's hiring, and they are going to take that big 500-page roadmap and create plans and specifications from which the building will be built. 118 here says, in addition to when the plans and specs come back from the architect, because the architect's going to draw something up, give it to the owner, do you like my layout? Do you like my volumetrics? And then it's going to get more detailed. Do you like the floor plans? Do you like how the construction? All those have to be approved as you work through a project. Owner always approves those. This one, 118, says, who else besides the owner is going to be looking at the architect's drawings? In this case, it's our specialty engineer that we hired that created the 500-page documents because they have the technology. They have the subject matter experts. So what the AIA has said, and again, this was all in the previous Exhibit A, but in 118 it says, hey, architect, not only is the owner going to be looking at your drawings, but these other people will as well. Just so, it's kind of a good check and balance on behalf of the owner.
Right, and that person is hired by the owner? Or
Yes. See, it would be persons or entities in addition to the owner's representative who are required to review the submittals to the owner. So the owner is going to retain someone. In our contract, it's called the owner's technical advisor. We've actually created a definition. Sometimes it's owner's consultant. Sometimes you actually identify the specific entity. McGuire Engineering or something to that effect. You may say their name. But the entity that's being referenced in 118 is the owner's person that's double checking what the architect is doing. Okay? 119. Now, one of the things we're going to get into in Article 2 when we start talking about the divisions of who does what, there is a traditional division of labor of what the architect normally does and what the owner normally does. So the architect is going to bring an electrical engineer, they're going to bring a structural engineer, they're going to bring a mechanical engineer. They're not going to bring the geotech engineer. That's the person that goes out and figures out what the state of the soil is. The soil borings, finds out if it's silty soil or clay or rock. And that's all going to be done, and that's who the owner is responsible for. And that's traditional. I've had owners that have come to me and say, I don't want to have anything to do with that. Have the architect hire all that. But traditionally, the owner is going to retain the geotech. Traditionally, the owner is going to hire directly the civil engineer. Civil engineer is the entity that's going to do sewers, street layouts, the flow of the land. So if you kind of think about it, how you understand where's this division of labor of the design entities, because geotech and civil are engineers. Where's the split? Think of it this way. Owner owns the physical land. The architect's going to design a building on top of it. Anything that has to do with the physical land, the owner's traditionally going to hire that. Geotech, what's in that soil. Civil, how do I make the streets flow and the hills go and the drainage? That's the owner because they own the land. Architect, building the building on top, is going to hire every type of engineer that needs to build the building. Structural engineer so it doesn't fall down. Electrical so there's lights. Mechanical so there's plumbing and heating events. That's a good separation. If it has to do with the ground and the land, owner. Has to do with the building, architect. That's who hires that. So this says, hey, 119, I'm going to identify who my specific engineers are. Here are their names. That's it. Real simple. Architect, 11.10. Architect, same way as the owner. Here's my representative. Here's my point person. Most of the time, it's going to be their project manager. Now, the reason why you have a specific representative for the architect and earlier for the owner is because you want to make sure there's only one voice speaking on behalf of the entities. Not in the project site. There's a project manager for the architect. That architect, that's the guy or the woman who is the representative for the architect. It's a Thursday. They send an associate. The associate's wandering around site, and he says, "Oh, we need to change this." That individual doesn't have the authority to do so. The contractor should know that that associate that says we need to change that doesn't have the right to do that. Let's say this associate tells the contractor, "No, you need to move the wall from here to there." Contractor says, "Okay," and he moves it. Sends a bill to me, the owner. There was a $2,000 charge because the architect told me to move the wall from here to there. I go back to my project manager and said, why do we do this? And she says, "Well, I didn't authorize it. There's an associate that did that." I don't have to pay the contractor technically because my agreement with the contractor says you can only listen to the owner's rep or the architect's representative. So there's some important things. Same thing on the other side. Owner has a project representative. That individual, her name and who she's going to be and what she speaks on behalf of the owner. And if somebody else is on the project site for the owner and authorizes, says to the architect, "Oh, sure, we'll pay you for that." The owner can say no, because the only person that has the authority to do that is the owner's representative. That's why you have it in the contract for both entities. There'll be similar language in the A-201 between the owner and the contractor. Contractor identifies their representative. It's a legal thing, but it is important so you know who is the point person. Okay. 1.1.11. Same with the owner identifying their consulting engineers. The architect identifies them. So we have structural, mechanical, and electrical. That's what I was talking about. They're the people that create the building. So that's who they're going to identify. Real simple in the agreement. Just fill in the blanks who you're going to retain. Some architects will do their own work internally, in-house. Most of them, though, for bigger buildings, for division of labor and everything, they're going to hire an outside architect or outside engineer for structural, mechanical, and electrical. Any questions on the division of parties? Great.
What do you mean by in-house?
In-house, so there's going to be, like, if I work for MWorks Architect and we have a bunch of architectural designers, I may also have on my staff an electrical engineer. They don't do architecture, they just do electrical engineering. They work for me, so they are in-house. They work, that's what the term in-house means, they work inside that company. So, 11.2, consultants retained under supplemental services. There may be sometimes this concept of supplemental services. In the agreement, there's basic services, there's additional services, and supplemental services. That's what the architect is providing. Supplemental services may be something more after the project has started that the owner wants the architect to do. For example, beginning of the project, they figured everything out, and the owner says, "I want to be LEED-like. I want you to design me a building that feels like LEED, but I don't want to spend the $50,000 of paperwork to get a LEED Silver certification. So design it so if we ever filled the paperwork out, we'd probably get LEED Silver. But I don't want to spend the money for the paperwork because I hear it's administrative hassle." And the architect and the contractor is written up like that. Boom. Sign the contract. Everybody knows how much they're going to get paid. Somewhere down the line, the owner's like, no, I want to do LEED. I actually want to file for LEED. So they would write a change order to the contract, like changing the terms, and this would be a supplemental service. The architect here may have to go out and find a LEED specialist. Maybe they don't have a LEED specialist on their staff. So that's who this would be. They would identify here. And sometimes you know up front, sometimes you know later. So this would be anybody that's hired for supplemental services. And there's a whole list, we'll get there in the agreement, of what are considered supplemental services. And then any other information is 1.1.12. So just fill in the blanks if there's anything else anybody needs to know about parties. Okay. 1.2. The owner and the architect may rely on the initial information. Both parties, however, recognize the initial information may materially change. In that the event, the owner and the architect shall appropriately adjust the architect's services, schedule for the services, and the architect's compensation. So, one of the elements in the initial information is the program. I want you to design me a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. That's the program. and I want you to deliver it to me, design, bid, build. And then you go back to the architect and say, we already signed the dotted line, that's the initial information, everybody can rely on it, that's what we're dealing with. And then the owner comes back and says, you know what, I still want that 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, but I want to fast track it now. I don't want to have it design, bid, build, because we have some stuff going on, we're getting out of our lease, et cetera, et cetera. Instead of the 18-month process, I need to be in the house in 12-month process. The initial information has changed. That's what this says, it can change. Architect says, I got to work faster now. Compensation needs to be changed too. So this provision just tells everybody, yes, we have this block under 1.1. Here are the rules to the game. Here's what we're going to do. But if anything changes, 1.2 says we get to be compensated for it. Everybody has to understand that if you change it, something's going to happen down the line. Pretty simple. And one of the things you want to think about, and what I try to do in these contracts, and when I break them down, is to say, what they're saying is actually pretty simple. The problem is, and since you guys are looking at this on the slide, when you look at that, have any of you guys ever seen this as it's printed out? This actual B-101 document, anybody? Okay. It's teeny tiny 10.5. It's really hard to read. I've been working on one of these documents the last couple of nights, and like last night I was working until about 2 o'clock in the morning. My eyes were like screaming because it's so tiny. And so what happens is, and I do this for a living, I know what I'm reading. The average person starts reading these contracts, are like, I can't see what it says. I don't understand. Turn the page. Where does it say how much I get paid? But the reality is that they're all pretty simple. I mean, this provision, yes, there's a lot of words up there, but here's what it says. If something changes, I may get paid more, or the schedule may change, and we all understand that. So that's what I'm trying to do, is break these provisions down into the basics of what they mean. So, all right? 1.3. The parties shall agree upon the protocols governing the transmission and use of the instruments of service. So that's a lot of legal lead. Here's what this says. Instruments of services. That's your drawings and specifications. And there's a definition later on. If you look at it, see the I and the S are capitalized. So as I talked about earlier, in contract drafting, if you see a term that uses normal words like instruments or service, or any word contract or agreement, where there's a capital letter, if it's capitalized, that means somewhere in the body of that agreement, that term has been defined. And the parameters of that definition have legal impetus. So, instruments of service, translation, plans and specifications. Could be models, pictures, everything else, but basically plans and specs. Parties shall agree upon the protocols of governing the transmission and use. How am I going to get you my drawings? Electronically? Paper? By wagon? You know, that's what the protocols of governing the transmission. How am I going to get you my drawings and specs? That's all that says. If it's a digital form, you use this thing called the AIA E203. That form talks about the rules that parties must follow in transmitting electronic documents. One of the most important rules is it basically says, everybody agrees that sometimes when you transmit something digitally, there could be a digital screw-up. And you cannot 100% rely on that, but we're doing our best. You guys work all on electronic documents. You know how to do layering, right? You guys do layers and stuff like that? Okay. So when you're sending out something on CAD and you got all these layers, you send a big package. Honest to God, sometimes some of the layers don't come through for whatever reason. The E203 talks about protocols of what you need to do to deal with that. So all this is saying is, parties are going to understand, we're going to be transferring digitally, and here are the rules of how to transfer digitally. And something goes wrong, this is what we need to do. That's what 1.3 says. Okay? 1.31. Any use or reliance on all or portion of the building information model is also called BIM. BIM is a process out there. That agree to work without agreement to the protocols and reliance on the information contained in here, shall be using or relying on their sole risk and without liability in the other party of the contractors and consultants. So what this says, 1.3.1 says, hey, under 1.3, we all agree what the rules are of transmitting documents. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to follow these steps. We're going to try to make sure that documents are electronically transmitted properly. 1.31 says, if you fail to follow the rules, it's your problem. If everybody decided a set of rules and one entity, the electrical engineer, decides to do something different and it goes awry, don't come calling back to me and saying that there was a problem with the documents. If they didn't follow the protocols established in the E203 document, it's at their own risk. This was not in earlier provisions because there was lots of litigation that happened when everybody decided on the protocols and then the protocols weren't followed. And so it ended up, there was lawsuits. Lawsuits said, so one party said, well, I was following the protocols, they weren't. So why should I be liable? And the courts came down pretty consistently with logic. If you didn't follow the rules, you got to carry it at your own risk. The AIA, in seeing that history of litigation, said, why don't we just stick that same provision in the document? Let's just add a provision now that says, buyer beware. That's what that says there. Lots of provisions in how this document grows every 10 years is based on problems that have occurred between the 07 and the 17 or the 97s from the 07. During that 10-year period of history, the guys at the AIA, the people the other entities that are working to create these documents, try to take what's real in the industry and fold it into the document. 1.3.1 is one of those circumstances. Okay? Any questions on that? All right. That's it for the initial information and how the parties are going to, who they are, how they're going to pay for it, what the project is, and how they're going to talk. That's what initial information is in Article 1. Article 2, architect's responsibility. So we're going to have a section, Article 2, on architect's responsibilities. Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Kind of a little off. I'm just curious how, for the test, it's multiple choice.
The test is all multiple choice. There's going to be nothing on the test in Article 1. Just so you know. So like I said, I'll try to point out when there's some things that are important, but I have no questions on Article 1 in the exam. I just want you to understand how these documents work. Because you will be using these documents soon. You know, you're going to get out, you're going to start working. You may not be seeing contracts, but you're going to be, what's going to happen is you're going to be working for a firm, and they're going to, and your boss is going to say, get those documents to the mechanical engineer. And you're like, okay, I got to send them. I'm going to send them an electronic set. Got to make sure that you got to say, well, do we have a digital protocol to follow? Those are some things you want to think about. So you know, I try to, the class, hopefully, you know, I'm going to try to question you guys in the exam on stuff so you learn, but things like today is as much of anything is how to understand a real world document that you guys are going to be using soon. So
it's not as much like the definition, the questions won't be as much like what is.
Yes. All right, so here's what's going to happen in the exam. There's going to be a question that'll say, looking at the B-101, there's going to be a whole, first of all, in the exam, there's going to be a point that says basically from here on in, it's the B-101. And for the exam, I'd say at least half of the exam is on this document, just so you know. There's about 40-some questions, maybe between 18 to 22 questions are going to be on the B-101. So you're going to, in the body of the question it says, pursuant to the B-101, if the owner did X, and there may be a basic simple. If the owner does X, which one are you going to do? A, B, C, or D? Or it could be an actual example. You know, every once in a while I'll throw out an example. Here's a project that I did, and here's what happened. So they'll say, owner and architect enter into a contract. They agree to this, this, and this. Using the B-101, which is the project delivery method? Or which is, you know, who has the obligation to do this? You know, so that's going to be, there's, you know, the architect has designs, and the owner has paid for the architect to do the services. Who owns the copyright? That type of stuff will be in that. So, and then there'll be an A, B, C. There are, and in the 40-some-odd questions, there's probably 4 or 5 true and false. The rest of them are just A, B, C, D. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Article 2, architect's responsibilities. So now we're going to talk about what the architect has the obligations, and then we'll talk about the owner's obligations. First, the architect shall provide professional services as set forth in this agreement. Real simple. I'm an architect. This whole document tells you, owner, what I'm going to do. Shall provide. The term shall is really important in contracts. It means you must do it. It's not a may, or sometimes you're going to see may in a document. It's shall. Professional services. They are a profession. They're licensed. They're going to provide these professional services. Architect then represents it's properly licensed. I got my little license I'm holding out, and I'm in a licensed standing state. In the jurisdiction where the project is located to provide the services required by the agreement. You got to make sure they're licensed where you're going to be building, so they can actually be permitted and everything else. That's all it says. I'm licensed, I'm going to be professional, and I'm licensed for the project to go forward. 2.2. This is the standard of care language. This is going to be one of the most important provisions that you guys have to deal with for the rest of your career. Standard of care is what architects are contractually and legally obligated to perform to. We've talked a little bit about it before, but I'll talk about it the whole semester, but we could never write a contract that says the architect's going to do this type of detail and this type of drawing and this type of plan and this type of section, because the contract would be massive. I mean, right now the contract I'm working on is 485 pages, but it's for a $700 million project. But you have to figure out, how do we encapsulate what the architect does every day for a living without writing every single thing they do out for a living? And they came up with this concept called standard of care. The architect shall perform its services consistent with the professional skill and care ordinarily provided by architects practicing in the same or similar locality under the same or similar circumstances. The architect shall perform its services as expeditiously and consistent with such professional service and care, skill and care, and in the orderly progress of the project. So there's a couple things I want to unpack in this so you guys understand this, how they look at whether you have performed in the standard of care. And if there's a lawsuit and the building has fallen down or something's gone wrong or there's a budget bust or whatever else, the other side who's injured is going to look at this provision. Consistent with professional skill and care, not just the average Joe's skill and care. So you are going to be held to a standard of a bunch of other architects. Or if you're an engineer, because this same language you'll find in an engineer's agreement. Mechanical engineer is going to be held to the same standard of other mechanical engineers. Not architects, not civil engineers, the same standard as similar mechanical engineers. Next, ordinarily provided by architects practicing in the same or similar locality. Ordinary. You're not the best architect, it's not the highest. So you're going to be with everybody else that's just the average architect. So while it's professional, so you've raised yourself up against the person walking on the street because you're professional, it's what every other ordinary professional architect is doing at that time. Now, sometimes I negotiate. Right now we're working on trying to get highest instead of ordinary into one of my agreements. The architect will give that, but I have to pay more because they're carrying more risk. But that's important. Next. Provided by architects practicing in the same or similar locality. You don't have to do your designs like you're designing it in California where there's a fault line. Same or similar locality. You design what a designer is going to be where the project is located. In the same or similar circumstances. Now this is kind of broader, this point here, the similar circumstances. That's a house versus a restaurant versus an office building versus a hospital. So it will be the type of project. That's one element that falls under circumstances. The other element that falls under the circumstances is it going to be a fast track? Is it going to be design, bid, build? What are the pressures and parameters that you're under? So this is your legal obligation. There's a lot of gray of what that means, but there's also an industry understanding of what it means. And you need to perform to that standard of care. And this will be running through, and it's a contractual obligation you have throughout your contract and what you're performing. So any questions on that concept and the different elements of what's in the standard of care? Okay, great. 2.3. The architect shall identify representative and authorized to act on behalf of the architect with respect to the project. So this is a repeat. They have this authorization in 1.1, who the person is, the point person, and this is, again, they're going to identify who the specific representative, and they're authorized to act on behalf. 2.4. Except with the owner's knowledge and consent, the architect shall not engage in any activity or accept any employment, interest, or contribution that would reasonably appear to compromise the architect's professional judgment. It's kind of a weird provision because it really has nothing to do with what you're doing. It's not about how we're going to design. It's not about your standard of care. But this came in over the years because sometimes, maybe the architect takes some money under the table from the contractor to look the other way. Maybe there's other issues that are going on. So what this basically is this creates, without saying it creates what we would call a fiduciary responsibility. You have an obligation, fiduciary, which is financial, but you also have an obligation to the owner. And you cannot compromise your professional judgment. Even in this instance here, one could argue that the architect, if there's something like a directive of the owner to look away at that code violation, the architect really can't do that here because you cannot compromise your professional judgment. So this is this kind of, again, there's a fiduciary relationship, there's a moral turpitude clause. This is, you have to be a good person and you owe a duty of loyalty to the project. So, now, there's this one part here that's except for the owner's knowledge and consent. What you sometimes find is that if the owner gives the architect a directive maybe to go off book and do something a little different, that you hopefully doesn't compromise your professional judgment. But there are times when if the owner tells the architect it's okay on that price point or it's okay on this, the architect can maybe deviate a little bit because the owner now, based on this, the exculpatory clause in the beginning of it, the owner now owns the problem as opposed to the architect. But basically what you want to do under 2.4 is you want to be consistent with who you are, how you're supposed to practice, the standard of care, and to the project and the owner.
Does that mean that you can take on like a bigger project at that same time, or accept any employment?
So it depends on what the relationship and what you've communicated. So a lot of times what I put in my agreement is I'm going to have language in there that says the architect shall identify for us the project team. And attached are the key project members. Architects shall not rotate or have the key project members leave and go on another project without the express written consent from the owner, of which approval will not be unreasonably withheld, or something to that effect. Basically saying, don't steal the A-team. Because the owner comes in and interviews and gets this great architectural firm and this great design team and really happy with it. And then and I'm paying a commission of $100,000 to your design team for the services. The next client comes down the road and says to the boss, I want 3 people from that A-team and I'm going to double their payment. Well, of course the owner, the architect, the principal of the firm is going to want the more money, so he or she will try to pull those people off the project. This is trying to stop that. Now, again, I'll add language in that emphasizes that and makes it even more clear. You are not allowed to do that unless you architects are not allowed to divide up the A-team unless you come to me first. But that's what this is trying to do. So, in answer to your question, yeah, this could be enough to say you're not allowed to take another project. Now, you got to remember also, most architects are going to be working on multiple projects at multiple times. You're rarely going to have a full-time architect on a full-time project because of the cost involved. So it's not to say that if I hire you for a commission and a $100,000 commission, you can't have 6 of those running at the same time. You just have to show that you're managing and you have this kind of duty or loyalty to the project and the parties. 2.5. The architect shall maintain the following insurance and termination until the termination of the agreement. And then we're just going to quickly zip through this because we talked a little bit about insurance last class. But basically what they did was, this was another change a little bit. They kind of beefed up the insurance requirements. The AIA has always had not bad insurance language, but not the greatest. So they kind of emphasized it a little bit more. But this is basically, if I'm an owner, I want to make sure whoever I hire, not only the A-team, but they have insurance. Because if the building falls down, maybe that firm doesn't have a lot of capital, and I would rather have the big insurance company to get my money back than necessarily the architecture firm. So, it just basically says here, you're going to have this type of insurance. 251 is commercial general liability. That's if, it has nothing to do with the design work. That's if somebody's coming to visit your office and they slip and fall on the doorstep. That's commercial general liability. This insurance is more important for the contractor than for the architect. But you have to carry that commercial general liability. You have to carry automobile liability. We've always talked about you're going to the project site and you deviate and you go to target. Well, you want to make sure at least when they're driving to the project site, there's an auto liability policy that the architect's carrying, not the individual. An umbrella, 2.53 is an excess or umbrella. Sometimes the value of the project requires more insurance than what the architect would traditionally carry. Pretty common nowadays, the architect's going to carry, for an auto liability, $1 million policy, the commercial general liability, $1 million policy. The owner may say, I want $5 million for each. So instead of buying a different auto policy, they buy what's called an umbrella. It's just a layer on top of it, just more protection. Workers' comp, anybody that works for you, if they get injured on the job, there's a certain type of, so that's mandated by law. That's why there's a statutory limit. Any business that has employees must have workers' comp. Employer's liability, this is if you get sick or injured or sick during the job, if there's disease or some other issues. That's another thing you have to have in Illinois, so it's pretty common. And then the most important for the architect is 2.56, professional liability. And that's covering your negligent acts, errors, and omissions. The professional liability policy covers your design services. Anything that you do in the performance of architecture, providing architectural services, is covered under the professional liability policy. So when you get sued, this is the carrier you call. You don't call your commercial general liability carrier, you call your professional liability carrier. And you may actually have two different insurance companies for those two. So this is the most important one. All of these, the blanks are they're all fill in the blanks as far as the value of it, and that depends on the price of the project and lots of other exercises that the owner goes through to figure out, is this a $3 million policy, a $10 million, a $25 million, whatever the values are. But this is your most important one, professional liability. And then 257 is any additional ones, like maybe your, additional obligations. So this is, let me see. So this one talks about if you're additional insured, and you don't worry about this for the exam, but there's a concept called additional insured. So think of it this way. You have auto liability policy as the architect. I've hired you as the architect. I'm the owner. There's a bad car accident. Someone's killed. Plaintiff's attorney sues the architect because they had one of the individuals was driving. Plaintiff attorney is also going to sue me, the owner, because that architect would not have been driving to my project site had it not been for my project. I don't want to have to call up my auto insurance company. I wasn't driving it. In fact, I don't want to have to call up any of my insurance companies because I had nothing to do with it. That doesn't mean, because we live in America, that I'm not going to get sued as an owner. So what I do is I tell the architect, put me as an additional owner, as an additional insured, so I basically can sit as the owner under the umbrella of their policy. So I get the benefits. Happens all the time. It's not very complicated. This is a very standard provision. But it's just to make sure that I, the owner, because I'm going to get sued, don't have to pay the bill and don't have to call my insurance company. I call their insurance company. So that's all 257 is. 258, architect provides certificates of insurance. It's just a piece of paper that says, remember all those types of insurance you asked from me in the last 2 pages? Professional liability, auto, CGL. Here's a piece of paper that says I actually got it. It's from the insurance company that says I placed these insurance. It's your certificate that I'm okay, and we're going to go ahead with the project. If I'm an owner, I want to get this. Like I had a kitchen renovation done a couple years ago, and it was just with a local contractor. I'm like, you're not coming on my project site until I get your COI, your certificate of insurance. So I want to make sure if one of your workers gets hurt, or if you're if somebody gets in a car accident on the way there, or if you're carrying a beam and you hit the neighbor's kid with a big piece of wood, that the insurance is in place. Once you get me the COI, you come on in and start working. And they just get it to you and send it like that. Real simple. Okay, any other questions on that? All right. Article 3, scope of the basic services. Now remember, there's basic, additional, and supplemental. So basic services is what every architect is going to provide no matter what for the project. And unless you strike it, there's some things you may strike out here. But this is the basic work. When I hire you as the architect, Article 3 is going to define what that scope of work is. This is what? I'm sorry? Yeah. Yep. Okay, first. 3.1. The architect's basic services consist of those described in this Article 3, real simple. If it's in Article 3, I got to give it to you. And they include the usual and customary structural, mechanical, electrical engineering. See, no civil, no geotech. It's just the usual and customary structural, mechanical, and electrical. Services not set forth in Article 3 are supplemental. So they're more than just the basic services, which you can ask for, and you get paid for. But for your price of $100,000, you're going to get Article 3. If you want anything in Article 4, the price goes up. Now, interestingly enough, and I say this in my lectures, and nobody from the AIA has ever told me this, but frankly, the way they structured this makes a lot of sense business-wise. Because at the end of the day, that's what you guys are out there. I mean, look, I love architecture. I love design. I love creating things. Truth be told, actually, this is a very complete off-ramp here. I play hockey. Very bad. But I get to design my team's jerseys. Last night, I sent out brand new jerseys for the team. It was so exciting because I love design. I love graphics. I love creating. I love drawing and everything else. That's why you guys, probably many of you guys are here, because you love designing. But at the end of the day, architecture is a business, and so contracts are part of business. What I'm trying to teach you guys is you got to think about it business-wise too. Don't ever remove or drop your design passions, because I have fun designing my hockey jerseys. But at the end of the day, that's what these are for. So what the AIA did, at least the way I look at this contract, is they say, well, every architect is going to provide these usual and customary civil, mechanical, structural, electrical. Everybody has to do that. But when the owner starts asking me for a little bit more, they're going to say, well, isn't that what you normally do? If it's not in the contract, then maybe the owner says, well, I thought you were going to give that to me, and it's in the $100,000. What the AIA said is, no, we're going to create Article 4, and we'll get there in a minute. Article 4 has all the other stuff, and there's this long list. It's really cool, and there's like, check the box. And every time you check the box, the architect can say, more money, more money, more money. And that's okay, because it's a business. So by structuring the contract to split between what I normally am going to give you and what more, you're also telegraphing to the owner, it's okay for me to charge you more, and don't expect me to give it to you free. Creates an understanding of the business relationship right away, and it creates a way for you guys to generate income. I think it's really nice. It's a really nice structure for it, because it's not in your face, it's subtle, but that's the purpose. One of the purposes is which I think. Okay. 3.1. 3.101, I'm sorry. The architect shall manage the architectural services, research applicable design criteria, attend meetings, communicate with members of the project team, report on progress to the owners. This is what I'm just going to do. I'm going to make sure that I'm doing the project right, I'm talking to everybody, I'm going to the meetings, and I keep the owner informed. Pretty simple stuff. Common. But an obligation, because it says what's in Article 3 is what your basic services that you must perform. So you got to go to meetings. You got to keep the owner informed. But it's pretty simple. 3.1.2. The architect shall coordinate its services with those services provided by the owner and the owner's consultants. The architect shall be entitled to rely on and shall not be responsible for the accuracy, completeness, and the timeliness of the services and information furnished by the owner and his consultant. The architect shall provide prompt notice if the architect becomes aware of any error, omission, or inconsistency with such services. So what does this say? Sometimes the owner's going to hire another designer. Maybe that's geotech. Maybe that's civil engineer. Or maybe it's a hotel, and you've been hired to design the hotel, and the owner wants a really cool up front of the house restaurant with an amazing kitchen, wood-burning fireplace and everything else, and they know a specialty kitchen designer. So the owner's going to hire that specialty kitchen designer to come in and design this really cool space that the architect, when they're doing the plans for the hotel, basically leaves a big box in their plans. It's just a big square and it says kitchen here, because they're not designing it. Owner's got a owner's consultant, the specialty kitchen designer in my example. What this provision says is the architect has to coordinate its work with the owner's consultant. So what's going to say is when I'm doing my drawings, or when you guys are doing the drawings of the hotel, you draw that box, that's where the kitchen's going to go, but you also have to say, here's where the plumbing is going to be coming into this box, where the kitchen's going to go. Here's where the electrical is going to come in. Here's where the ventilation. The owner's consultant's actually also going to have to talk to the architect. I need the electrical to go here. I need the ventilation to go there. So there has to be this communication and coordination between the prime architect, you, and the specialty kitchen designer. That's what this says. You have to communicate. You must coordinate, the architect must coordinate its services with the owner and the owner's consultant. It also is not responsible. The architect, though, says, hey, I'll work with them, I'll coordinate them, but if they have an error in what goes inside that box, in my example, not my problem. I'm not designing it. I'm not responsible for the accuracy and completeness. So if when they start to build out the kitchen and something's missing, not my job. Unless, because you got to remember, when these documents are put together, the architect writes the first draft. The AIA writes the first draft of these contracts every 10 years. And then they give it to contractors and owners and subconsultants and lawyers. And the owner says, the entity that's representing the owner says, wait. I get it. If I hire that kitchen designer, you're not responsible for their designs. But what if you see something wrong with their drawings? Can you just say, hear no evil, see no evil, say no evil? No. Let's stick another provision in here that says that the owner shall provide, the architect shall provide proper notice to the owner if the architect becomes aware of any error or omission. So if the architect, when they get the drawings in from the specialty kitchen designer, and they go to stick those drawings on their plans, they create another layer in their CAD drawings, and they plop that kitchen into that box. The architect becomes aware of problems with the kitchen designer's designs. The architect needs to tell the owner here. So the architect can say, not my problem, but I can't take a blind eye to it, so I got to make sure. And that's, again, that duty of loyalty to the whole project. So let's coordinate, work together. I'm not responsible for your designs, but if I see something wrong, I got to tell the owner. That's just the way it's going to work. It's going to be similar language in the kitchen designer's agreement. It's going to say, hey, I'm not responsible for the whole hotel. I'm just responsible for my kitchen design. But when I go to plug my stuff in, if I see your architect hasn't done his job, owner, I'm going to tell you that your architect needs to fix those things. So it's reciprocal. Any questions on this? Great. 3.1.3. Okay. So 3.1.3 is a provision that talks about scheduling. Talks about here shall include the anticipated dates for the commencement of the construction for substantial completion, and then it talks about approval by the owner. So think of it this way, where 3.1.3 is. I come to you as the owner, and I hire you to build me a toy factory. I got to start selling my toys in August, maybe September, to make my numbers for Christmas season. I got to hit it. So when I hire you 18 months before, I come to you and I tell you that. We want to go online August 1st because there's a ramp up. I got to train my employees. There may be some screw-ups in the machine lines. I got to have at least a month before September hits before I got to start going out on TV with my new Blinko doll or whatever it's called. You, architect, are going to design this facility for me. Can we make it in this time frame? And tell me the date. And I want to know when's going to be the commencement of construction. When? Because I got to go out and hire contractors sometime. You create a schedule for me. And your schedule tells me when you're going to design, when the construction starts, and substantial completion. Another one of these capitalized terms, a defined term. And